Hello, welcome to our class on perspective. Hopefully, gonna get some folks coming on in here. I'm gonna give it a few more minutes, just one or two, as we wait on a couple stragglers to pop into class. Today's discussion lecture will be on perspective, the basics and a little bit of history on 1 point to 2 point perspective. And then I'll do a drawing demo for you guys live on that. In the chat function here, please ask me any questions as we go along. This is a tough subject to get through, so don't hesitate to ask some questions as you need to, okay? Basically what I'll do is every now and again I'll glance up at the chat box and then kind of read your question aloud to everybody else and then answer it. Before we get started on the actual subject at hand, I want to take a second that I would do if we were in a regular class and just talk to you briefly about how things are going, what I'm kind of seeing in your drapery assignments, which I'm still in the process of starting to grade. I should have those done either tonight or early tomorrow. So I just wanted to really quickly give you guys some heads up. Number one, you're doing good. That was a hard assignment. I know that. Perspective is also a hard assignment. And really the only complaint that I have as a class is I think that some of you might not be spending quite enough time on your drawings. I know that the way that things are right now with COVID and jobs and all the figuring out how to take college online, you might be struggling with time management and figuring that out. So here's my reminder to you. This class takes about 10 hours a week. It's not something you can do in your free time. This is like a part-time job to take this class. So what I recommend that you try and do, if you can, is to set aside consistent time, either every day or every other day throughout the week to get your work done and to get it done on time. I'm usually, when I see someone's work and it's clear that they've put in many hours on the piece, I think it's really quite good. It's not like any of you that I've seen can't handle the subject matter. It's just that some of you might not have had enough time to get it done. So that's my 2 cents on that. Please just set aside the time. It's a difficult time for everyone. Do the best that you can to set aside 10 hours a week to handle the assignments for this class. Okay? All right, I think it's time to get started into perspective. I just wanted to give a quick shout out. I threw it into the chat. RIP to Eddie Van Halen. Man, that's tough. I'm an old guy, and growing up in the 80s, Eddie Van Halen was kind of like the epitome of rock and roll, cool, and was something that young kids really wanted. Bill and Ted wanted Eddie Van Halen in their band, that sort of thing. So anyways, it's a bummer to see that he passed from cancer today. So on that rather sad note, let's talk a little bit about perspective. Okay, so here's the thing about perspective that you need to know as an artist, and that is that perspective is a series of rules, and they can be kind of a challenging set of rules at that. And you need to understand them so that you can break them intentionally, so that you can know when to ignore them, not accidentally screw up your perspective, right? Perspective, I think the two biggest things that any novice, non-artist can walk into a gallery show or look at your work online and immediately see problems with are human proportion and perspective. We're all really good at spotting it. And so you want to be in complete control of that element of your drawing so that if you decide to break the rules of perspective, it's really intentional and it's nothing that you accidentally did. So let's talk a little bit about perspective. I'm going to start off with a few definitions for you all. The first thing is, what is perspective specifically? The definition that's written on this slide is my definition of perspective. The basic idea behind perspective is that parallel lines on a single plane will appear to recede to a shared point in the infinite distance. Now I say appear to recede because of course they don't actually get closer together as you go along those lines. They continue on parallel, but they appear to get closer together when you look down a railroad track or a hallway or a road or something like that. They appear to get closer together. So in this slide, you can also see a couple other points. The first one is vanishing point. That is that infinite distance point upon which those parallel lines appear to recede. And you're looking at a 1-point perspective, meaning that there's one vanishing point. The other one is the horizon line. Now, a lot of people confuse this with the actual horizon, like the place where Earth meets sky. But the horizon line actually represents the eye level of the viewer or the artist who's looking at the piece. And that means that above this line, everything you'll be looking up at, and below this line, you'll be looking down at. Now, this seems to be confirmed by photography. This is a photograph of the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, and you can see in this image that basically all the parallel lines of the cascading columns and the top line of the ceiling and the bottom line of the floor all appear to hit a vanishing point just to the right of that doorway in the far distance, right? And you'll notice that even the pillars on the far right of the image also recede to that same vanishing point. And that's because all of these lines, all of these pillars sit on the same plane, the same ground plane, and they're parallel to one another. So they share the same receding vanishing lines. Now, here's a tricky spot about perspective. And I'm going to get into a little bit right now about some of the problems of perspective, I guess you could say. Some of the ways in which perspective is not truth. So I don't know if this happened to you when you first started taking art history, but for me, it was very clear. And I wondered, like, why before the Renaissance could artists not draw as well as after the Renaissance? And specifically when it came to perspective, like, why was it that these artists after, the 1500s able to see in perspective in a way that artists before them weren't able to? And I think that it has something really specifically to do with our eyes. We don't see in perspective, okay? There's a couple of really key things that we have as humans that perspective doesn't account for. And I imagine if we were all in the same room right now, some of you would raise your hands and say, oh, I can guess what a couple of them are. The first one, and I think this is really straightforward, is we have two eyes. We see in stereoscopic vision. Perspective is monoscopic. It looks through a single eye, like a camera lens. So often when you're drawing in perspective, you wind up having to close one eye so that you can kind of see and stay in a really static point so that you can make sure that the perspective doesn't change. That really brings me to my second point, and that's that you have to stay in one single point. Now, most of the times, even right now where you're looking at this screen at home, your eye is moving all over the place. You're looking at me, you're looking at the image that I'm talking about, you're looking at, the other screen that you have pulled up. And as you do that, your eyes are moving all around and your brain is compiling all of that into a single set of images that are based on your movements. And each one of your little micro movements has its own perspective, right? So if my eyes look where they're looking right now, and then I turn my head and look this direction towards the rest of my basement, now my perspective is totally shifted from this perspective. And each time that happens in even a small amount, you're putting together all of these other vanishing points into this one space. So perspective requires you to see out of one eye and to be very still. Hey guys, hey Ariel, Patrick, Morgan, good to see everyone. It's nice to see y'all. Thanks for saying hi. Okay, so the other thing, and this is a little trickier, is that our eyes are round, right? Hey James, good to see you too. They're a ball, right? Your eyeball is a ball. It's a round surface. So if you know how an eye works, light comes in through your lens and projects an image on the back of your eyeball. And then your optic nerves translate that to your brain, and then that's how you see. So a camera works very similarly, except that it functions on a flat surface. The back of a camera is a box. It's flat. Your paper is also flat. So these three things, stereoscopic vision, rounded back projection edge, and constant movement, make perspective an approximation of how we actually see. Let's talk about the rounded eye thing. So, once again, perspective projects onto a flat plane. And this image from a treatise on perspective kind of showcases that. That vertical line shows what you would essentially be looking through. I have another good example of that. So here's how that is working, right? So this glass piece that this artist is looking at as he stares at the table is showing that distance that point at which all of his perspectival lines are meeting a flattened surface. And that's kind of what we have to keep tricking ourselves into doing when we draw in perspective, is to ignore the roundness at the edge of our vision and to push everything back out to the side. I'm curious if any of you agree with me that there's roundness at the side of your vision. I've been able to kind of teach myself how to see it. I think it's easiest if you stand really close to a wall, like a long wall, and you look straight ahead, and you're going to see as the wall goes past you, it kind of curves away from your vision. It's an illusion, right? But it's an illusion caused by the curve of your eyeball, which is crazy that you can perceive that. Well, perspective has its own breaks as you get further to the side. Now, here's what blew my mind when I did a little bit more research into art history and me thinking that these earlier artists couldn't draw in perspective, which was nonsense. Perspective is an invention. It just hadn't been quite invented yet. The thing was that those artists were attempting perspective very often, but they were attempting a projection onto a rounded surface, and it created what you see here called a herringbone projection. And it looks like this. So if you've taken, ancient to late antiquity art history yet at Clark, you've probably seen an image like this before. And you can see that the perspective above that standing figure is almost right. It goes into the wrong places. And that's not because it's wrong and they couldn't figure it out, but because they were attempting to project it onto a rounded surface. Here's what those might look like as you project them out. And I just want to point out that the image on the left on a rounded set of receding lines still works to me. I think it looks right. In fact, it has a little bit of an epic quality to it. Like when you pan back in The Lord of the Rings and you see the entire Moria space, it has this kind of bigger sense to it. And that's because it's tending to curve with our eyes. This is a crazy thing. And I throw this in there just to kind of remind you just how smart ancient humans were. This is the Parthenon in Athens. And if you can believe this, the Parthenon is actually built on a counter curve to your eye. So it isn't straight. It appears straight. They built it opposite the curve of your eye so that it would look straight when you looked at it. And the reason for that is because they wanted it to be reflective of the fact that it was divine. It was a temple of gods. And so in order to get it to actually look straight, they built it on a counter curve. Crazy. This is a great kind of late Chinese screen. This is from Wang Hui, and you can see it's kind of late because it's 1700 or 17th century, which Chinese art history goes back 5,000 years. It's super old. And this image really, I think, helps me to see why perspective didn't really come about until people started living in gridded cities like Rome. And here you have a city. You're looking down it from a hill, and the city itself is not on a grid. So the need for perspective isn't very clear. Why do you need to be able to see everything exactly in parallel lines? This screen, because it's bigger than you and you have to move along with it, allows you to see each individual place, almost like a comic book. You notice that there's similar figures throughout this image. They're actually being repeated. It's like a comic book without individual panels separating time. So as you move along this gigantic screen, the more this hand scroll, the more you're able to kind of move with the image. And it starts to account for the own movement of your body and therefore the passage of time. This is a piece by a really important artist to me, David Hockney. This is a series of photographs. It's a photographic collage. He just used a cheap little disposable camera. Back in the day, you'd buy these at Walmart or whatever, and you'd take all these disposable cameras, and then you'd go and they would process the film for you. And that's what all these are. And then he put it together. He calls it a drawing, where he took all of these images and then collaged them together into a single image made up of many hundreds of one-point perspectives. Each time he snapped the camera, of course, he gets a one-point perspective, and he pieced it together into this piece called Pear Blossom Highway. And a couple of points that I want to make about this, and the reason I'm showing it to you in a conversation about perspective is because you notice down there on the bottom left where he looks down at a bottle on the ground or a box of, like a beer box, his perspective therefore changes. It shifts to downward, which is much more like how we actually experience space as we move through that space. When your eyes go down there, you see from the perspective of an artist who's shifted their viewpoint to the downward space. When you look up at the stop sign in the distance, well, Hockney had to climb up on top of a ladder to take a photograph of that stop sign directly head on so that it would appear straight in the image and not angled up as if you were underneath it. So at each point as he put this image together, he constructed an idea of what it meant to move through the space. And that's something that perspective isn't very good at. It tends to take a single snapshot in time from a static, monoscopic position, and it places you in that one little freeze frame moment. And it's that kind of challenge or flaw in perspective that has caused a lot of artists, I mentioned comics earlier, comic books, of course, overcome that through multiple panels so that they show a single perspective in one panel and then many other perspectives in each subsequent panel, allowing you to move through a narrative where time happens. Cubism, essentially, with Picasso, did something very similar, where it tried to compose a whole series of perspectives into a single set of images. And that's kind of what this piece by Hockney does as well. Okay, so that's what's wrong with perspective. Let's get back to understanding how to deal with it. Your assignment for this week is to create either a 1-point or a 2-point perspective drawing of an interior space that is from a photograph. Now, you can take that photograph yourself or you can find that photograph. I don't really care. What's important is that you are able to work and spot and find your horizon line, your vanishing point or points if you're working in a 2-point perspective, and that you're able to figure out how to construct that space from observation. This is different probably from an assignment that you may have done in high school or in other classes where you invent an entire world in 1-point or 2-point perspective. Maybe it was a street, right? You had to do a street in 1-point or 2-point perspective and you built that out. That's a different process. This is really, it's very similar, but what I want you to do is to try and be able to find these horizon lines on your own as you work so that you can kind of figure out how they happen. Now, if this is your first interaction with perspective, a lot of this might be going like, what the heck is he talking about, man? This is weird. I don't quite understand it. So let me try and back up a little bit and give you a little bit more information about 1-point perspective. So when do you use 1-point perspective? Let's start there. When you're looking for photographs of interior spaces, how you're going to determine if it's 1-point or 2-point perspective is mainly based on, is the thing that you're facing, in this case, the back wall of that room, is it parallel? Is it square to me? Does it look like a square? Or is it at an angle? Am I facing a flat wall or am I facing a corner? Okay, if you're facing a flat wall, 1-point perspective. If you're facing a corner, 2-point perspective. We'll get to that in just a second, okay? So in this image, which is just a gridded out design, this is something that this artist made in pen and paper, but obviously you can use programs like Procreate that will do a lot of this for you and they'll help you to create your room space. I don't want you to use one of those for this project. I want you to try and construct your perspective on your own. And a couple of points that I want to quickly make about this is that don't lose your sense of design as you start to make this image. The image that we're looking at makes 2 really smart design decisions right away. Number 1, the horizon line is very low in the room. It's not smack in the middle of the back wall. What does that do? It causes us to be a little smaller compared to the rest of the room. Remember that the horizon line represents our eye level. So now we're looking up at the ceiling of the room. Number 2, it puts the vanishing point for us very close to the right wall, making the rest of the room open up away from us. That helps to create a lot of movement and momentum in the way that the piece works. If you don't do that, if you put the horizon line smack in the middle and you put the vanishing point smack in the middle, you have a very boring composition. It's a very flat, static composition. Here's an image. I love just doing random Google image searches. This is one. I couldn't find the artist on this one, but this is just a 1-point perspective. Someone invented this street. They did a really good job. And you can see that a lot of things that we just talked about are true in this image. the horizon line is relatively low, making us look up at the buildings. And the vanishing point for that street is also skewed to the left-hand side of the page, putting us closer to one side of the alley than the other. That helps to create a lot of movement and asymmetry in the piece right away. It's a good decision. Here's one not as good. This is by Paolo Uccello, one of the fathers of perspective. And you can see that this horizon line is pretty much smack dab in the middle of that back wall, and the vanishing point is pretty much smack dab in the middle of that of the whole image, the whole composition. But even though I'm not that crazy about that, you can see that the perspective works. The perspective of the lines of the rafters in the ceiling definitely angles to the same vanishing point as the lines in the floor. I mentioned David Hockney earlier. Here's another piece by him where you can see that the perspective inside the room clearly matches the perspective outside in the garden. One by Edward Hopper. This one threw me off when I first saw it years and years ago. I kind of thought it was maybe two constructed perspectives, the room from inside the theater and then the room of the woman standing outside the theater. But actually, those perspectives align with one another. If you follow the lines on the wall on the right, the top line and the bottom line, and you follow them, they'll hit right in the middle of that image, on the left. Okay, 2-point perspective. What happens if you turn in your room and you're, instead of facing a single wall, you're now facing a corner and you can see both walls angling away from you? That's when you use 2-point perspective, because now the left wall will have its own vanishing point, and the right wall will have its own vanishing point. And so in order to deal with that, you need to spread those out quite far from one another so that you can construct a room in 2-point perspective. Let me show you what that looks like. Here's that same artist as before, another street scene in 2-point perspective. And you notice that because we're facing the corner of that building right in front of us, now we have vanishing points that recede to the horizon line, both to our left and towards our right. Now we can really spot the vanishing point on our right. It's somewhere like over here. Maybe you can, if you follow the line from the hay bales, we can see it kind of come together over there on the really far right-hand side of the drawing. But the left vanishing point is way off the paper. And that's a really good key point to remember if you're using 2-point perspective. It's going to be rare that you're going to be able to see both vanishing points on your drawing. You're too far away from one of the vanishing points. It moves too far outside of your perspective. So that means that you're going to have to figure out a way to keep track of where that vanishing point is, even if it's off your paper. That might mean putting a little dot on your drawing board or on your drawing table that represents that vanishing point that you can reference back to again and again. Oh man, I love Piranesi. So Piranesi, an artist from the 1700s, you can see this one's from 1745, made these inventions of these invented spaces, and this is called his carceri, which is like a fortress, like a prison, basically. And he made a whole bunch of these that were just totally invented. He's just winging it. But I love them. This is a 2-point perspective, and you can see this massive scale that he's working in. This is an etching, but it basically functions by our standards like a pen and ink drawing. So just imagine drawing in like a micron pen, and that's kind of what he's doing here. And you see this extreme low angle, right? The horizon line is actually probably about the bottom edge of the paper, maybe even a little bit below that. You have one vanishing point far to the left-hand side, one vanishing point far to the right-hand side, and everything angling up. That makes it feel massive. Like we can't even see where we're standing. We only see this gigantic fortress standing above us. And then, of course, he puts these tiny little figures in there that remind me a little bit of Rembrandt's cows. They're like these tiny little figures walking on the stairs, and it's so cool. I love that drawing. Okay, I'll leave you with this last image from art history. This is one that I would ask you: is this a 1-point or 2-point perspective? Any guesses? It's tricky. It's both. So the room is in 1-point perspective, right? We're square to that back wall. The left wall, if you follow the line from the floor and the line from the ceiling, clearly come to a point right just to the left of that woman playing her musical instrument, and that's kind of similar to the table, the top table edge next to the white pitcher, angling back to that same spot. But the floor, because it's angled offset to the rest of the room, has 2 vanishing points, and each line of those of the tile cascades to vanishing points that are on the exact same horizon line as the single point from the room, but are on now 2 vanishing points for that space. So yeah, Vermeer was good. And then I just thought I'd throw in one more image from the world of comics. You can see that Greg Capullo in this image of Batman has put 1 point perspective into the image of the big splash page that's in the background, the scene of Gotham. And then as we zoom in on Batman and Commissioner Gordon talking, top panel, we see 2 point perspective, next panel 1 point perspective, next panel 3 point perspective because we're looking down on them, and then a final 1 point perspective in the last panel. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our discussion of perspective. Do we have any questions so far? This is a good time for that, and then I'm going to start drawing for you guys and try and give you a little bit of a demonstration of how to set this up. If something comes up, feel free to throw it into the chat. If you're watching this after the fact, of course, you can email me or throw it into one of our discussion boards on Canvas, and that can help us kind of figure this out. Okay, Emmy says, how much shading are you looking for from us? Can it be a line drawing? I want it to be a completely finished drawing. So determining what I mean by finished drawing is like, this should be a 10-hour drawing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be shaded. It could be inked. It could be colored. It could be fully shaded. What I don't want is just a pencil line drawing that feels unfinished or feels like a sketch. Okay, so your pencil marks are the starting point of it. That'll take you a certain amount of time, and then I want you to kind of correct and finish that out as you go. And so I think ultimately that's going to be determined by you, like how much do you want to work that space in, and then what media you want to use in. And I want it to be something that hopefully you're feeling pretty excited about when you actually start to work. So hopefully that answers your question. Ariel asks, also to confirm, any interior 1 or 2 point perspective picture is okay to use, even something we grab off of Google. Yeah, I think so. I think that, if you're looking for something off Google, it's nice to have something in your own home, honestly, because then you can take the photo of it and you can go visit the space and you can get a better photo if you don't like it and stuff like that. But if you want to use an image, I'm going to use this image off of Google. This is a warehouse. I wanted to draw a warehouse for you guys because it pushed the space really far back. I don't know what warehouse this is. I like Google image searches that aren't super obvious in terms of like what you're looking for. If you just type in 1 point perspective interior into Google, you're going to get a million images that kind of suck. And it's going to need to be like, they're just going to be really generic. And I recommend that you think in terms of more specifically, what do you want to draw? Do you want to draw a cathedral? Then look for cathedral. Do you want to draw a warehouse? Look for warehouse. Do you want to draw like a really fancy modernist house? Then look for those things. If you narrow your search function down a little bit, you can find something that might interest you more than something else. And the reason that I'm having you guys work from a photograph instead of from like life for this drawing is because I think it will really help you to figure it out. Once you do figure out what like how to do perspective and how to draw, then I think it's going to become less important, generally speaking, for you to have to work from a photograph. And the photograph should be like a tool in helping you figure this out more than the only way to do it. Let's see. Turna asks, does it need to fill the entire page? Not really. It needs to fill the entire composition. So what I'm drawing on right here, you can see me get started, is a 18 by 24 piece of Bristol drawing paper. I love Bristol for this project. It works great with a pencil. This is a mechanical pencil, a cheapy mechanical pencil, and that's what I'm going to lay everything in with. Bristol is very smooth. It's very white. It's nice and easy to control, and it's thick enough to hold ink if I want to work later on in ink and that sort of thing. Now, you're looking at this huge drawing paper, right? 18 by 24. If I want my final image to be something like, let's say 11 by 14, which is a reasonable size for this, that can have a grid, or a border inside the paper. Once I draw inside that space, I want that whole drawing to fill the whole composition. Just like you all to start doing in your sketchbooks as well. Doesn't necessarily, if you're only just drawing on a sheet of paper, then fill the whole freaking sheet of paper. But if you want to show me the border of where you're trying to frame that in, take your edges of your drawing all the way to the edge of the border. Consider the entire composition. It's really good practice that you need to start getting yourselves in the habit of always thinking, how can my composition be better? How can my composition help to move the viewer where I want them to see? And so I guess my answer to you, Turna, is yes, kind of. Use the whole paper if you're using a relatively small sheet of paper. If you're using 11 by 14 or smaller, use the whole sheet of paper. If you're using 18 by 24 and you want to narrow it down a little bit, that's okay. Okay, so all I have right now on my drawing, and I'll try not to move around too much. You guys can see my webcam here. This is a little tricky because this means that this drawing board is like sitting in my lap. So I'll try and do my best not to like screw it all up. Cut me some slack if you can. I'm still kind of new to the live streaming game. Although now that we're working on it, maybe at some point I will, become some kind of podcaster or something like that. Okay, so what I start with in this drawing is I look at the photograph and I first try and see for myself, looking at this warehouse, where is the horizon line in the warehouse? And where is the vanishing point on that horizon line? Now, it's clearly 1-point perspective. Hopefully you all can see that because I'm standing square to the back wall, and all the lines of everything from the shadow, the lights on the floor, the cast lights from the overhead lights on the floor, the angles of each pillar, the side walls, all V to a point on that back wall. So what I need to do in my drawing is determine where that vanishing point is and where the horizon line makes sense for the rest of the drawing. Now, you'll notice I'm not using a ruler. You're allowed to use a ruler. I'll talk about that a little bit more as I work, but I don't love rulers in this process because what winds up happening if I do it that way is everything becomes so stiff and I become scared to correct something if I botch it, and I want to be able to make sense out of what I'm doing, and I want it to still just feel like one of my drawings. I don't want it to suddenly become like a robot drawing, just really, locked in a really specific way. So I think that I know this is really light. I will start to darken things so you can see them better on the image once I understand a little bit better what I'm doing. And you'll see that how I'm kind of working is piecing together. So I'm trying to make sure that my vanishing point right here is correct based on what I'm looking at with the line of the bottom edge of each of the pillars coming towards me out of the image, and then the top line of those same pillars moving towards me this way. And once I kind of am pretty sure that I'm hitting that close to right, which I think I kind of am, then I can start to put in a little extra detail. Now, I like to, on a perspective drawing, draw from the back of the drawing towards me, not from my perspective into the drawing. And that helps me a lot because it lets me establish the scale of the drawing at the very beginning of it. I do really like those shadows on the ground, which sometimes I will hold up my pencil like this and like place it along the photograph at an angle. Like, so say, okay, that looks like the angle of the top of the pillars, and that looks like the angle at the bottom of the pillars. And it'll help me to kind of situate that in space with myself. And that's what I'm going to do for the bottom edge of that and of the light, and just kind of help me figure out how far over from the vanishing point, because if it's straight underneath the vanishing point, you're going to have a vertical line, and I can tell that the light on the the reflections of the windows on the floor of the warehouse aren't perfectly vertical. They're kind of just off of vertical, but just barely. But I like those lines because they help to make the warehouse feel huge. Like, without that, it's not going to feel as big. And the whole reason that I wanted to draw this drawing was so that things would feel big. So now I'm going to throw in a few details about the back wall so that I can start to kind of understand my proportions. And this is eyeballing it, right? I'm doing little micro measurements with my eyes and with my hand, and I'm moving things around and kind of fixing things as I see it. And this is just normal drawing. This is what you do all the time. But it's going to help me to determine if I have my proportions correct as I work. I feel okay about that back wall. I think there's a little thing there. This is where if you need to use a ruler, it could help the further you're getting away from yourself on a big sheet of paper. And I do have a big ruler here. What I use, or what I like, is I have a pretty good size. This is a 36-inch ruler, so like a yardstick, but it has a no-stick thing on the back of it. I like it a bunch. If I need to use it, it's there. So it's not like it's against the rules. I just don't like to be super beholden to it, because even though my lines are a little sloppy, it means that as I go in and clean them up later, I can keep them a little bit more in line with how I normally draw, if that makes sense. Okay, it's okay. It's not bad. Decided to scoot my vanishing point over just a little bit. All right, that's getting there. So you can see I've got some kind of messy lines, and I'm trying to kind of clean them up a little bit as I go. This is just a gray eraser. It's really good for cleaning up fingerprints, but also a number 2 pencil lightly thrown in will do a lot for that. So let's spend a little bit of time on these pillars here. This is the part that makes me a touch nervous. Let's go ahead and use the... Give me a really clean straight line that I can trust for a little bit. All right, now this is should just be a guideline to my drawing. Where is it going to go as I start to walk these pillars towards me? Now I need to make some decisions about the overall space, okay? Because I've got one big pillar that's way up in front of me, and like how far does each of that kind of work to everything else? So it looks to me like if I took the width of the back wall and doubled it, so if I went down to there, like this amount of the back wall, right underneath it is about where that bottom, the pillar that's closest to me on the side is gonna go. So I'm going one underneath it, I'm going to turn on its side and go 1, 2 over. So 1 underneath it, 1, 2 over is about where that is. So that whole space from the closest pillar to me that actually in this image goes off the top of my drawing. So kind of back to Terna's question, it means that my drawing is going to have to stop about there because that's where that pillar strikes the top of the frame. So once again, the way that I'm kind of working that in is as a just like any other drawing, right? I do a measurement of the backspace, use that as a judgment call. It's all about a ratio. So if my drawing is based on this distance of that back wall, I go one down, and that shows me where, I realize you guys can't quite see this. Let me move this up. So I go one down and then two over to the side of where that starts. And then now I have a line where I know that I'm pretty close to the distance from here to here, that I'm not totally screwed up completely off in that spacing. Okay. So now I need to try and figure out how to do the rest of these pillars. There is a mathematical way to do that. You can count the number that you have. So in between this one and the back one, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what you can do is you could divide this front object into 6 equal parts. You draw each one back to your vanishing point, and then you cross that line with a diagonal, and each point that it knocks across that, you draw a pillar. Let me show you how that works. And then I'm going to show you how I actually do it, which is way more eyeballed than that. Okay. So if I'm dividing this into equal sixes, then that's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's, I guess, do I have to do a sixth one? All right. This is the part where I'm always going to screw up. I think I do have to do a sixth one. So 1. Want these evenly spaced. They're kind of only close to evenly spaced because I'm definitely winging it. Try and smooth them out a little bit more. Okay. Do I have 6 now? Yes. All right, so now each one of these goes back to the vanishing point. And then I draw a line from this point to that point, at the place where it hits the floor. And I go. And now each spot that it crosses one of those lines is a pillar. So a pillar goes there, a pillar goes there, and there, and there, and there, and there. I've posted some pretty good videos of how to draw in perspective on our Canvas page, where you can see other artists do this same method. And you can see it's pretty close to what I'm looking at over there on the side. But I actually prefer to kind of trust my eyes a little bit. So even though I just did all that, and hopefully that made some sense to you, I apologize for the clunkiness of it. I'm going to erase out everything I just did. And I'm going to wing it because I'm going to eyeball it from this very first pillar. I want this distance to make sense with the light on the ground. So I've got the first light goes in like that, and the next light right above it. And that is where I'm going to draw over and make a decision about that pillar. Now you notice as they get further back, they get much closer together. And that's true whether you use the mathematical method or you eyeball it. Now, the more complex it starts to get, the more I'm going to have to start to pay attention to what my lines represent, like which lines are actually drawing lines and which lines are just there for me to like figure out the perspective of the space. And however that works, I just need to be kind of aware of it and try not to let it confuse me. And that can be tricky. I personally think this drawing could use some greater contrast, so I'm kind of excited to shift to something that has a little bit more shaded ability here in a minute. But hopefully you're starting to see how the perspective of this space is going to work in my favor. I am going to move this down once again. So this is probably where Emmy's question starts to come up for me as well. Like, how finished do I want this drawing to be? And I think it depends on the media I want to finish it in. If I decide to finish it in pen, like an inked comic drawing or cartoon page, then I'm going to want to spend a lot of time kind of cleaning up my lines and trusting where my pen marks go. And I probably will use a ruler for some of that. If I want it to be a little bit more loose and more kind of moody and applied with charcoal, then I might shift to something like that, in which case I probably would spend more time on organizing the light and dark of the room. You know, really focusing on how the shadows come in from the roof and so on and so forth. This is a good time for any other questions as I'm working. Hopefully you can kind of see how the room's starting to come together. I like to bounce around a lot in a drill, getting the sense of how the space is working. And I think I would like a little bit of shading to start to happen soon. So kind of figure that out as I go. It'll help because then I can start to use my eraser as well to piece in some of the light spaces between pillars. So right now, my drawing goes from this line almost to the edge of the paper and then up to about there. So that's the frame of my drawing. And so you can see I'm using the whole sheet of paper, but a lot of this is just to help me kind of anchor everything properly. One of the images that I included in your Canvas shell about just other artists using perspective is by a German painter that I like a great deal named Anselm Kiefer. And he has this kind of painting on burlap that is has this kind of ancient feel to it. It's charcoal and oil paint on burlap, and it just feels really cool and old. And it's a lot like this. Everything angles to a single point. It's got this really kind of dramatic one-point perspective that really forces you to deal. I'm probably much looser with this than you've seen other like demonstrations be. And that's because I trust that I can clean it up later by erasing and correcting for mistakes. And what I'm more interested in, as I said, like especially if I start shading this thing, the more that I do that, the more that I'm going to kind of muck up my drawing in the first place. So I want it to be loose enough that I don't feel like I'm married to the thing, like it has to be exactly what I see over there, or else I'm going to wind up feeling like I've got no control over the overall space. Okay, I think I'm going to throw in some heavy darks and start to kind of work this up a little bit. I'm going to shift from that mechanical pencil to, hopefully this lead doesn't crack, to a 2B. This is a 2B drawing pencil, and I'm going to start to figure out some of the dark spaces in the drawing. I'm pretty happy with what we've got so far, and I want to get a little bit more heavy-handed with it. So I know at a glance that the roof line much darker. It's hard because, all right, you guys are just gonna have to tolerate. Sorry. Turn your page if you need to. So what I'm doing there is I'm trying to use the mark making of the pencil to help to instigate a sense of the perspective of the ceiling. I don't want these marks to go the same direction as these marks because that'll flatten out the space, right? So instead, I'm trying to get them with enough oomph to really work across that whole thing. This is going to look terrible for a minute, and then I'll try and do a little bit of cleanup. All I'm going to draw is for about maybe 10 or so more minutes. I just want you all to be able to kind of see where I'm going with it. It doesn't have to be exactly, you know, like I said, this should be about a 10-hour drawing. I'm, you know, only 40 minutes into it or whatever, maybe less than that. When is maybe 30 minutes into it. So, you know, this should be a much longer process than I'm going to give it right now while you guys are watching. So for yourselves, you know, just understand that it's okay. These things take time. It's a slow drawing process, and you got to do, you know, you got to give yourself the time to make that happen. You're not going to be able to do it in, you know, 15 minutes or something like that in between, you know, like on your lunch break or whatever. Like, you're going to have to sit down and work it for a while and probably give yourself a break after you've been doing it for a bit and come back to it and help yourself determine the space inside your drawing. Because I'm kind of messing up my drawing a bit, I need to kind of occasionally throw back in my horizon line, my vanishing point. once I get these pillars back in and I throw a little bit of the light and shadow on the floor, I think I'll stop for now. I'll try and do some more, another hour of drawing on it after I'm offline, and throw an in-progress shot up for you guys to see so that you can see where it's going. That's really my whole point with this, is I just want you to be able to kind of see how I'm constructing the drawing and pay attention to how I'm using perspective to help me build a drawing that I don't think I'd be able to build without perspective. That's the whole point. How can you use this method, this tool, to help you make a drawing that you would find very difficult to do without the tool? That's it. And you can kind of start to see how this is going to go, I hope. I actually sometimes really like working on drawings like this in charcoal. They're just so much faster to shade than with a pencil. This like back and forth nonsense. You notice that anytime that I use my finger to smear anything, I very quickly after that try and clean up the space around it. One thing that I'm seeing on some of you all that aren't as comfortable with it yet is that you'll do a smeary move and then you'll just kind of leave it there. And that on its own is usually not enough. You've got to go in and kind of clean up around it. Otherwise it just looks kind of greasy. I also, if I'm drawing in pencil or charcoal, I usually reestablish some of my own marks back into a drawing after I've started to smear it too much. The smears on their own, the values on their own aren't as kind of powerful a lot of times as the mark making can help them be. And so going back over them with a directional mark, being a little bit more careful with it as you do, can help a lot. You guys getting the feel for it? You seeing how it's coming together in this super sloppy drawing? Oh man. Let's throw in some heavy moves. That's all stuff that I can clean up. So, this big dumb move right here, well, I haven't even hit that highlight on the post yet, so I'm gonna need to throw in some heavy work on that. Kind of show you how that might start to look. again. I know this is pretty damn clunky, but I'm hoping that you can just start to see the atmosphere that I'm starting to work with, the space that I'm trying to start to kind of create, and let that start to drive how to finish the rest of the drawing. So let me kind of circle back to a question that was raised earlier. How much do you need to finish this drawing? Like, how done does it need to be? How much detail? How much shading? All that kind of stuff. Well, I think that's what's really crucial on any drawing or painting is to decide what finished looks like while you're working on it, okay? Because in each section, you're going to have like decisions to make about that. I don't want to have to draw everything in like 100% the same detail as everything else, but I definitely need to decide on some focal points and decide where, what do I want my viewer to look at? And so I know that for me, the pillars and the lights on the floor are the whole reason I picked this drawing in the first place. Like the reflections of the space. So how light and dark is everything. And in order for that to look like it does to me, it's going to require quite a bit of shading to knock some of that down. Perhaps I should have chosen some gray paper for this so that I could use white Conte or a white colored pencil instead of having to shade the whole damn floor. But I didn't, so I've got to throw in enough shadow for that to work. Otherwise, it's just not gonna be what I'm hoping for in the drawing. One thing I love about these gray erasers is you can smash them down like that and then get in there and hit a little bit more. If you're dragging your hand through your drawing, you're going to wind up with this all over it, like I'm doing right now. You need to, from time to time, clean that off. But I'll also suggest a really simple move, which is something this will save you a ton of a pain in the butt as an illustrator. Just have a separate sheet of paper that you set your hand on. It'll really help you out a lot as you move around so that you're not constantly mucking up your drawing as it starts to get more refined. Okay, I think I'm going to draw for a bit longer, but I think it's a good time for me to see if anyone has any questions about before we wrap up the class portion of this live stream. And then I'll just sit here and draw for a little bit longer, maybe another 15 minutes. But I'll probably stop talking, might even turn off my mic and just draw. So if you'd like to keep watching, it'll be here. But if you are ready to move on, you'd be free to do that as well. Are there any more questions about your project before we go on? Try not to get discouraged. This is a tough project. It's another hard one, but it's one that I think you need to understand pretty well as a drawer. If you're anything like me, it'll click when you're not working on it. Like, you'll understand perspective better. For me, it happened actually in the middle of an art history class. I'm sitting there in a big lecture hall. Too bad we can't be in one of those right now. And learning about you know, some artist, and I'm looking at the side of the wall. There's a brick wall next to me, and I'm looking at it and I'm trying to figure out, I'm noticing how all the lines in the mortar of the brick cascade away from me, and all of a sudden I can just find the vanishing point, and I'm like, there it is. And here's where I am in relation to that. And if I turn my head, here it is again. Here's the new vanishing point. And once that started happening, I started being able to see it. I'd see it when I was driving at home from work, and I'd see it in the road, and I'd be able to start kind of picking it out as I needed to. And then it just got a lot easier for me. You know, when I was working on comics, it stopped being this like constant hassle to like figure out the perspective, and I started just being able to spot what it was I was looking for in the first place. But like anything else in this world, it's going to take practice. So try not to get discouraged if it comes slowly. Okay, gang. Why don't we call it the end of our class live stream? We'll call it there. And like I said, I'm gonna keep drawing for a little while longer. But I'll go ahead and say my goodbyes to you now. If there's anything else that you need as you get started on this project, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email. And let me know what the struggle is. If you have a photo of it, be sure to post in progress shots to our in progress page. I will throw up a week 3 one, so that we don't kind of keep repeating again and again. And in the meantime, I will finish your drapery grading just as soon as I can. And if you have any questions about how the grades went or anything like that, please let me know. Happy to talk to you about it. And as we work on that and figure that out, I think you'll start to see where your strengths and weaknesses in the class lie. And like I said earlier, the bulk of the thing, if I had one bit of advice to give 1/3 of the class, it would be try to give yourself more time to draw. You know, don't try and do a 3-hour drawing in 20 minutes, and don't try and do a 10-hour drawing in 3 hours. Neither one of those will work. You have to piece it out. And that means that, you know, I know this drawing isn't due until Sunday night. Man, don't wait until Saturday to start it. It's going to kick your ass. So get in there, get some work done on it. Start it today. If you've got an hour right now, find your drawing, get it started. Find your photograph, get it started, and see where you're at. And it's going to help you a lot just to understand, like, hey, you know what? This is going to take me longer than I thought. You know, that sort of thing. But thank you all so much. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Email me any questions you have. And I hope to see some of you tomorrow at our extra credit, the Clark Art Talks. It's at noon. I sent that out in our announcement. There's a Zoom link. If you go to that and you do me a little write-up just about who the artist was, what they said, and what you thought about it, you'll get some extra credit for it. I'll do those throughout the term. You'll get 1 point on your final grade of extra credit for doing that. So it's an easy way to start to build that number back up. So come to the thing tomorrow if you can. And in the meantime, have a great afternoon. Take care. I'm going to turn off my mic, but if you need anything, just let me know, okay? Okay, thank you everyone for watching the live stream. I'm going to cut it now. I'll keep working on the drawing, and I will post a picture to our Canvas page. In the meantime, email me with any questions you have. Take care.